Let's talk about one of the most controversial topics in modern dating: body count, sexual history, whatever you want to call it, and specifically, how women actually think about this when it comes to relationships. This topic gets messy fast because everyone has an opinion shaped by their own insecurities, experiences, and values. But today, we're going to cut through the emotion and look at the actual psychology behind how women process this question. Not what people say on social media to virtue signal, but what actually happens in real relationships. Fair warning, this is going to challenge some beliefs on both sides of this debate. So stay with me. 1. The cultural shift. First, we need to acknowledge that the landscape has changed dramatically. What society expected from women 50 years ago versus what it expects now are two completely different things. The sexual revolution, birth control, changing gender roles, dating apps. All of this has fundamentally altered how people approach relationships and sexuality. Women today have more freedom to make their own choices about their bodies and their relationships than at any point in human history. That's just the reality. And with that freedom comes a wider range of experiences and histories. But here's where it gets complicated. Even though the culture has shifted toward more sexual freedom, the psychology hasn't necessarily caught up. Both men and women still carry evolutionary programming and social conditioning that creates internal conflicts about this topic. For women specifically, there's often a disconnect between what they're told they should think and what they actually feel. Society says body count shouldn't matter, that past is past, that judging someone for their sexual history is outdated and sex negative. But internally, many women still process their own choices through a lens of how it affects their relationship value. This isn't about being judgmental. It's about understanding that humans are complex. We can intellectually believe one thing while emotionally feeling something different. And that tension is where a lot of the confusion around this topic lives. 2. The pair bonding question. Let's address the elephant in the room, the pair bonding argument. This is the idea that the more sexual partners someone has, the harder it becomes for them to form deep emotional bonds in future relationships. There's actually some research suggesting that higher numbers of sexual partners correlate with lower relationship satisfaction and higher divorce rates. But here's what people get wrong when they quote these studies. Correlation is not causation. Just because two things happen together doesn't mean one causes the other. It could be that people who have higher body counts have different attachment styles or relationship approaches that lead to both more partners and less stable relationships. It could be that people who struggle with commitment naturally end up with more partners over time. The cause and effect isn't as clear-cut as people want it to be. From a female psychology perspective, here's what actually matters. Women who have had many casual sexual experiences often report feeling less satisfied with casual sex over time, not more. The dopamine hit decreases. The emotional emptiness after increases. And many women reach a point where they actively want something different because the casual approach stopped serving them. Does this mean they can't pair bond? Not necessarily. What it means is that their relationship needs might have evolved. They might actually be more ready for something serious because they've experienced what they don't want. But there's also a real psychological factor at play. When someone has had many partners, comparison becomes inevitable. If she's been with 20 guys before you, statistically, you're probably not the best at everything. And that can create mental comparisons that wouldn't exist with less experience. This works both ways, by the way. It's not just a female issue, but from a psychological standpoint, comparison is one of the fastest ways to kill satisfaction in any area of life, including relationships. 3. What women actually think about their own history. Here's something most guys don't understand. Women think about their own body count way more than you realize, and they often have complicated feelings about it. Some women feel empowered by their sexual history. They see it as exploration, freedom, living life on their own terms. They don't regret it, and they don't want a partner who judges them for it. But many women, when they're being completely honest, have mixed feelings. They might not regret all of it, but they regret some of it. They might wish they had been more selective. They might look back at certain experiences and realize they were seeking validation or trying to fill an emotional void rather than actually enjoying the experience. This is important because it affects how they show up in relationships. A woman who feels shame or regret about her past is going to be defensive when the topic comes up. She might lie about the number. She might get angry if you ask, not necessarily because she's trying to deceive you, but because she's still processing her own feelings about it. On the flip side, a woman who's genuinely at peace with her choices won't have that defensive reaction. She'll be straightforward. This is my history. Take it or leave it. No shame, no anger, just honesty. Here's the psychological truth. Most women don't want to be judged for their past, but they also often judge themselves for it. They're carrying their own internal conflict about whether their choices were empowering or mistakes, and they're looking for a partner who won't add to that internal criticism. 4. Does it predict relationship success? Let's get practical. If you're a guy wondering whether a woman's body count matters for whether she'll be a good partner, here's what you should actually be looking at. The number itself tells you less than you think. What matters more is the context and the pattern. Was she in a party phase in college and has now completely shifted her priorities? Was she going through something difficult and used sex as a coping mechanism? Or is she still actively in that lifestyle with no indication of wanting something different? A woman who had 15 partners over a 10-year period while genuinely looking for relationships is psychologically very different from a woman who had 15 partners in 6 months while actively avoiding emotional connection. The number is the same, but the psychology is completely different. What you should be paying attention to is how she talks about relationships and intimacy now. Is she capable of emotional vulnerability? Does she value depth over novelty? Can she communicate openly about difficult topics? Does she show signs of being able to commit and work through challenges? Those indicators matter infinitely more than a number, because plenty of women with low body counts still struggle with commitment, emotional intimacy, and relationship skills. And plenty of women with higher numbers have done the internal work to be excellent partners. Here's another factor. How does she handle conflict and stress? Because that's what actually determines relationship success. Not her sexual history, but her emotional maturity and communication skills. The harsh reality is this. Some guys fixate on body count because it's an easy metric. It's a number they can judge without having to do the harder work of actually evaluating character, values, and compatibility. But relationships don't fail because of body count. They fail because of poor communication, mismatched values, incompatible life goals, and inability to handle conflict. 5. The male insecurity factor. We need to address why this topic triggers so many men. Because often, the obsession with body count isn't really about the woman's history. It's about the man's insecurity. There's a fear that if she's been with many men, you won't measure up, that you'll be compared and found lacking, that she's settling for you because the more exciting guys didn't commit, not because you're actually her first choice. These are real psychological fears, even if they're not always rational, and women pick up on this energy. When a guy is overly concerned about her body count, she often interprets it as him being insecure. And insecurity is one of the least attractive qualities to women. Here's the thing. If you're genuinely confident in what you bring to the table, if you know your value and you're secure in yourself, her past becomes far less threatening. You're focused on the present and the future. You're focused on building something real. The past is just information, not a judgment of your worth. But if you're insecure, every guy she's been with becomes a ghost you're competing against. And that's exhausting for both of you. She'll feel like she's constantly being measured and found guilty for choices she made before she even knew you existed. The mature approach is this. Understand your own boundaries and values. If a high body count genuinely conflicts with your values around sexuality and relationships, that's valid. You're allowed to have preferences, but don't dress up insecurity as values. Be honest with yourself about why it bothers you. 6. The honesty dilemma. Here's a practical issue that comes up constantly. Should she tell you the truth about her body count? And should you even ask? From a female psychology perspective, this question puts women in an impossible position. If they tell the truth and the number is high, they risk being judged or rejected. If they lie or refuse to answer, they risk the truth coming out later and destroying trust. Many relationship experts actually advise against asking this question at all. Not because the information isn't relevant, but because the conversation rarely goes well. It often creates problems that wouldn't have existed otherwise. But here's the counter-argument. If this genuinely matters to you, if it's tied to your core values, then not knowing doesn't make it go away. It just delays the inevitable conflict. The healthiest approach is probably this. Don't ask for a specific number. Numbers are arbitrary and often inaccurate anyway. Instead, have conversations about values, relationship history, and what you're both looking for. You can learn everything you need to know about someone's approach to relationships and intimacy without playing the numbers game. If she volunteers the information, listen without judgment. If she doesn't, decide whether that's something you can accept or if it's a deal breaker for you. But don't try to extract information and then punish her for being honest. 7. The real questions to ask. Instead of fixating on body count, here are the questions that actually matter for relationship compatibility. What does intimacy mean to her? Is it purely physical, or is emotional connection important? This tells you whether you're aligned on what makes sex meaningful. What are her views on commitment and monogamy? Has she demonstrated the ability to commit in the past? This matters way more than how many people she's been with. What has she learned from past relationships? Is she self-aware? Does she take responsibility for her part in what went wrong? Or does she blame everyone else? This indicates emotional maturity. How does she handle conflict? Does she communicate openly or shut down? Does she work through problems or run when things get difficult? What are her relationship goals now? Is she looking for something serious? Is she ready to build something real? Does her behavior match her words? These questions give you actual insight into whether she'll be a good partner. Body count gives you a number that may or may not mean anything about who she is today. Here's the bottom line. Body count matters to some people and doesn't matter to others. Neither position is wrong. What matters is that you're honest with yourself about your values and why you feel the way you do. From a female psychology perspective, most women want to be seen for who they are now, not judged for every choice they made in the past. And most women are far more complex than a single number could ever capture. Focus on character, compatibility, and connection. Those are what actually determine whether a relationship works. If this made you think, hit subscribe. We're tackling the topics other channels avoid. See you next time.